and you have such a wonderful state. So, I mean, I just thought, what perfect timing, too. So, yeah.
Yeah. Plus, you're supporting the post office, which is, a good and noble thing.
Yep.
How'd you find out about this, Jessica?
Well, both me and my friend are very active I've been to 2 protests, and reporters always take pictures of my posters because I do kind of scary posters. We're just very active in getting the word out. In fact, my last poster was kind of scary. I had a bloody hand on it and said, Republican senators, you have the blood of the hands of the people, COVID on your hands too. So, and people were like, ooh. So, yeah.
Jessica, thanks for the call and thanks for the heads up on that. I'll check it out. It looks fascinating.
Thank you for telling
keep
people.
Up the great work.
Thank you so much. Okay.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. So what's going on here? Well, the bottom line is that the Trump administration, and by the way, this is the Republican Trump administration. There's so much focus on Donald Trump himself. This is not just Donald Trump. You've got an entire administration that has gone fully fascist now, and you've got an entire Republican Party supportive of it, or at least not resisting it. John Kasich has come out and said enough, but, he's a washed-up Republican politician who hates unions. I don't think that the Democrats are going to embrace him, even if he does speak at the DNC. But the whole thing is a mess. And the authoritarian part of the Republican Party is showing up right here in Portland. Portland is a test, but it's only a test. Trump signaled this election strategy a few days ago when he talked about ending legislation that was passed back in the 60s to support fair housing. When he said that that legislation, which he is suspending, had, quote, sent people, end quote, into, quote, the suburbs, end quote. Essentially what he's saying is, white people in the suburbs, I'm doing what I can to keep your neighborhoods white. You have to be very afraid of these black and Hispanic people the Democrats should be able to live anywhere in the country. How dare they? That's essentially the message that Donald Trump and Roger Stone and the Republican Party are sending you. I mean, Portland is an overwhelmingly white city. So, he figured he could test out his secret police, his stormtrooper strategy here without anybody much noticing, because it wouldn't be so racialized. But now he's taking it to Chicago, a city with a far more diverse population. And if he's successful, he'll provoke a made-for-television appearance with white stormtroopers battling black residents. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is hoping for. The most recent polls show that white people, particularly suburban white people, who were half of all voters last year, half of all, not exclusively white, but half of all voters in 2016, in the last presidential election, were suburban. Half. And a very large portion, disproportionately large portion of those suburban voters, I think it's 73% of American voters are white, and or Americans are white, but whites in the suburbs much higher than that. This is just, and they support Trump. White people still, according to the most recent polls, majority of white people support Trump, particularly white men. And he's trying to get them cranked up enough that every single last one is going to show up to vote for him. This is a base mobilization strategy. It looks to me like Richard Nixon's Southern strategy in 1968, where the police provoked a riot at the Democratic National Convention, and it just got going. Well, of course, you had a bunch of terrible things happening in '68. The peak of that being the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which led to cities burning. And that's what got Nixon elected, or at least that's what Roger Stone thought got Nixon elected. And I think, Roger Stone is still advising Donald Trump. He's known him for all these years. The strategy is really simple. Provoke violence, make cities burn, and then promise to keep white people safe with law and order. This should not be a secret. But Trump has cranked this way out of the Trump administration. Now, the Chad Wolf, the acting director of Department of Homeland Security, and Bill Barr in the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, this is what authoritarians do. To seize political power, they don't bring us apart, they tear us apart. And now, in anticipation of this election in just a few months, Trump is trying to destroy our ability to vote by mail. He knows that the polling shows, although this may be changing now that coronavirus is popping up in red states, but as of a month ago, the polling showed that Democrats were far less likely, far less willing to show up in person at a polling place to vote than were Republicans. Republicans didn't think coronavirus was that big a deal. Democrats knew it was. So he's trying to make it harder to vote by mail because that would be mostly Democrats as of a month or so ago. He's trying to explode the pandemic by forcing our kids back into school so they can come home and infect mom and dad. He's fighting funding for testing because I think he's pursuing a maximum chaos strategy. If he can have the maximum level of screaming chaos in November, he has the biggest. And by the way, with all the mail-in votes, it's going to be several days after the election before we know who won. And during that time, Donald Trump is going to be claiming that he won. That was the strategy that the Bush campaign used in 2000 when Bush's cousin on Fox News announced that Bush had won the election, when in fact, that was not the case. Al Gore actually got more votes in Florida, and if the Supreme Court hadn't intervened, Al Gore would be president right now. So, and then on top of that, Trump is sending his secret police, his stormtroopers into our cities. They're coming to a city near you. And history shows that the most effective response is nonviolent. Here in Portland, we had 300 moms, a middle-aged Navy veteran, and a stripper. Right? John Lewis taught us about nonviolence. Martin Luther King taught us about nonviolence. Jesus taught us about nonviolence. Get ready. Coming to a town near you. How do you think your town is going to prepare or respond? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And now we're getting reports that the Department of Homeland Security is spying on protesters groups. It's amazing. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. On the Science Revolution, Sonia Shah, author of Pandemic, is here, and she says it's time to tell a new story about coronavirus. Our lives depend on it. Dr. Enric Sala with National Geographic tells us how the benefits of protecting 30% of the planet will outweigh the costs. Lily Eskelsen-Garcia with the National Education Association, the NEA, is dropping by. How is America going to protect our children as Trump and DeVos force them back into school? And Charlie Jang with Greenpeace USA is here about how a Green New Deal and the DNC will get along. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is so much going on. I just got an email from from Trump, from the Trump White House, suggesting that Portland has been out of control and anarchists have been running the city and quack quack quack, and we had to step in because violence is up and murders are up. Well, yeah. Violence is up and murders are up. By the way, they're not higher than they were 10 years ago, but they're up from last year. They were actually 4 months ago radically down. What you see is that at any point in history in the United States, and you could probably see the same thing in any country around the world, but I'm familiar with our history on this count, that when unemployment goes up significantly, crime goes up. People have to feed themselves. We don't have a good social safety net in this country. A lot of people don't have access to decent housing. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to basically the core stuff that gives you some sense of dignity in life. And on top of that, you've got people who have been locked down with this coronavirus for months now. Many people since March. And they're starting to snap at their spouses, and they're starting to get angry with their neighbors, and they're starting to get pissed off with the world, and that's entirely understandable. And incidents that might have been a shout are now a fight, and incidents that might have been a fight are now a shooting, and incidents that might have been a shooting are now a murder. Surprise, surprise. But the answer to all of that is not to send in the Gestapo. Stormtroopers don't solve problems. They're creating problems. This is just a naked attempt. It's not the protesters. Trump, the email I got today from the White House was explicitly blaming protesters for violence in our cities. And Trump now saying he's going to solve that violence. And protesters, of course, is code in Trump speak to white suburban voters, code for those black people protesting the murder of that black man, George Floyd. That's what they're talking about. And the simple fact of the matter is that the protesters and the protests have nothing to do with the rise in violent crime. And now you've got this Mark Sumner writing over at the Daily Kos today. Parts of the intelligence community meant to deal with terrorism have been turned inward, not against the proven violent threat posed by white nationalist organizations, but against protesters involved in a reaction to the police murder of George Floyd and the push to remove Confederate monuments. Trump created a new police force specifically to protect monuments. That may well be who's here in Portland. And so now, because they are a standalone police force within DHS, and they have the mission to protect monuments, they are spying on anybody who might not like monuments, which means basically all the Black Lives Matter groups and anybody who's protesting pretty much anything. Turning this country into a police state is not going to make things better. Let's pick up your calls here. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Yeah, I'm really wondering if this isn't some sort of a precursor to what might even happen in the days after the election.
Count on it.
Yeah, I mean, if he sends, and I'm wondering where they're recruiting these people. I've been hearing DEA agents are part of this force. We've heard Border Patrol. What if it isn't the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys that have not been recruited into this organization? And by the way, they're the ones responsible for quite a bit of the rioting and the looting. The other thing I want to bring up is, real quick, Tom, just aside, that German euthanasia program was called Action T4, Aktion T4, ran in 1939, 40, and 41, and then it was stopped. It's something you should read about. Ken Follett, in his book, Winter of the World, he used it in a couple of chapters, in the plots of a few of his chapters. So it's worth reading. And I got to say that this is Trump's program regarding COVID. I think it's a euthanasia program. He's trying to kill as many people who won't vote for him as possible.
Yeah. I shared that opinion last week, and a few people said, "Oh, you're off the rails, Hartmann," and others were like, "Yeah, it could be." Yeah, I'll check that out. I thought I read every Ken Follett novel that there was. When did he publish this? What was it, about winter?
Winter of the World. It's that novel. It's a pretty big novel.
Yeah, but typically they are. I mean, is it a relatively recent one?
I'm not sure. Probably about 10 years old. But it's about the German. It was designed to euthanize Germans inside Germany with physical and mental deficiencies, especially young kids. Some of the people working in the hospitals where the euthanizing was going on, they contacted the clergy, the Catholic and the Lutheran clergy, and then you had this outcry from them on Sundays, and it was starting to stir up some resentment, and then they stopped the program, except they really didn't stop it because it did continue on. It just wasn't working as it had been. So anyway,
okay, I'll have to check it out. Dennis, thanks a lot for the call. I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Sharon in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much. I watch you every day, and I want to thank your previous caller because I think he's spot on a lot of this that's going on. What you have is came out with a report from Jeffrey Cahill and another reporter, and the Young Turks did a whole series of a story on it yesterday at 2:30. And what this is you have Blackwater security in that federal building. They won't tell you who they are. They can't show proof of who they are. And they have decided they're going to set up their own private. Donald Trump is Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, Eric Prince that owns Blackwater. You also have, the guy with the Ron Contra.
Ollie North?
Ollie North, yeah. You have all these people that have set up, and they're being backed by some very wealthy billionaires to set up their own private CIA and own private intelligence, that all this intelligence will go through the private government. They're setting up their own private government. And what they're doing is they're setting up strategic locations in this country and using federal buildings to do so because he knows his numbers are down. He knows he's going to lose. So they're setting up these strategic locations so when he does, he can not step down and have these guys step out there and start shooting people and say, oh, he had to get the rights in order in the street. You have to remember that that this mongrel dog in the White House was raised by a man that believed in dare to be great, L. Ron Hubbard, dare to be great stuff. And if you say something enough and you say it long enough, it's a form of mind control. And that's why the people that follow him are in a cult. But this is dangerous.
Sharon, I agree. I'm going to have to check this out. It's been a long time since Jeremy Scahill has been on our program, but I'll ask Sean to reach out to him right now. She says, "Yep," in my ear. Tony in Shirley, New York. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Quick question. I recently noticed that the Trump administration had instituted a new inspector general. And my quick question regarding this is, with the postmaster
You're talking
general.
about the post office?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
now,
new postmaster general. Okay, yeah.
Yes, my apologies, sir. Now, with the new postmaster general in effect, I've already seen multiple documents that have been released, basically controlling the amount of mail that's flowing in and out, controlling overtime, controlling overflow. And my question is do you not think that this is maybe a precursor to possibly gaining control of a more enhanced mail-in by vote campaign? Because it appears to me that this is one way that he can potentially control how the ballots are either drawn or whether or not they even get picked up.
Yeah, or even distributed to people's homes. But yes, absolutely, and slow down the mail in Democratic areas or in cities. There's a lot of possibilities here, Tony. This is creeping fascism right in front of us. Privatize the post office, privatize everything. That's, having government functions done by private corporations is virtually the textbook definition of fascism. And, these changes in the post office are designed, frankly, to destroy the post office, in my humble opinion. I think it's fairly easy to figure out when you read what the Postmaster General is saying. There will be changes in the quality of our service. That's basically his message. And apparently they're happening pretty soon, if not already. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back. At the top of the next hour, I want to really dig deep into Milton Mayer's book about how the Nazis took over Germany. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Lydia in Tehachapi. How do you say that in California, that town?
Tehachapi. It's an indigenous community. Yes.
Oh, great. So what's
Land
up?
of the Four Seasons.
Mm-hmm.
How are you?
I am well. So you're on the air. What's on your mind, Lydia?
Well, I've been listening to the program, and I wanted to discuss with people about the U.S. Postal Service. A lot of people don't remember or know that under the Bush-Cheney administration, they called together a meeting of private corporations which actually competed with the U.S. Postal Service to supposedly, and I'm doing air quotes, analyze the Postal Service in order to improve it. And
right.
Among the many things that they did was to formulate this piece of legislation which basically took away profits from the Postal Service in order to establish a fund for workers that have not even been born yet or will not even be working, but it's to fund this plan 75 years in the future. Yeah. And I was shocked the other day when I heard that Mnuchin was suggesting that they give the Postal Service a loan. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, the Postal Service is being sacked on a daily basis.
Right.
It's
They've got $50 billion, sitting in the bank that they can't touch for 75 years. This is what George Bush did to them in 2006 after the year before they announced that they were going to electrify the largest individual car fleet in America, the postal trucks. Mm-hmm. They were going to electrify them, and the fossil fuel billionaires came out and said, okay, that's it. And, the Bush administration
jumped. And for that reason, I'm saying, why are we giving them loans? Just give back the money that they have been sacking them, and they will run and function just fine. My mother was a clerk in a carrier for many, many years, and she was a proud member of both the unions, the carriers and the postal workers union. And so I grew up listening to her talk about what was going on and the problems that they were facing. And her last years were under Bush and Cheney, and we were constantly talking about this to people. It's not a piece of information that a lot of people are remembering. The Postal Service provides a unique service. It is the only business that has always been independent and self-sustaining and profitable. And yet we're expecting to privatize it and think that it's not going to ruin the nation. How are we going to divide the nation up among a number of private corporations? They couldn't emulate, even come close to emulating what the U.S. Postal Service has historically done. And now we're getting these reports of horrific changes in the Postal Service, which have been going on for quite some time in order to stifle the work that they're doing.
This is Reagan's starve the beast strategy on steroids, Lydia. You take away money from a federal agency to the point that they can no longer provide the service that they typically provide in a decent fashion. Then you say, look, their service is deteriorated. Let's give it to a private corporation. This is pure and simple starve the beast. And, David Stockman bragged about this back in the early 1980s when he was office management and budget director for Ronald Reagan. It's happening again. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we just put up a new member-only video talking about Donald Trump being a racist and how we're all dancing around there, or at least the media. By we, I'm talking about the media that I'm a part of, I suppose. The media broadly is and for that matter in Congress. I mean, with this House resolution to condemn Trump's racist tweets, they couldn't condemn Trump as a racist. That would have been a violation of House rules. But his tweets, we'll condemn them, right? This is the same guy who said, and I quote, laziness is a trait in blacks, end quote. He said, quote, immigrants from Haiti all have AIDS, end quote. He said, if Nigerian immigrants came here, they would, quote, never go back to their huts, end quote. He referred to S-hole countries. He lied about Obama repeatedly. I mean, anyhow, let's just call out his racism. All the examples are in the video, and I think you'll find it fascinating. It's available over at thomhartmann.com, so check it out. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Amazing. Ramon in San Francisco. Hey, Ramon, what's up?
Tom, I'm so happy to talk to you. Tom, this morning I read the San Francisco's Chronicle, and right on the front page, there is an article that really scares me, because it says that Donald Trump is ready to send the feds to fight the protest in Oakland, in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And believe me, Oakland is peaceful now. In the beginning, like the whole nation, it got turned on, but now it has receded and everybody's peaceful. So now
the protests by and large were peaceful to begin with, Ramon. But yeah, absolutely. But he's not trying to keep the peace. He's trying to provoke riots, particularly racialized riots. That's specifically what they're trying to do. It's absolutely breathtaking. And Trump has mentioned Oakland. This is very troubling. How do you think the city will respond if Trump sends these guys in?
The city is ready, but we have limited resources in comparison to the feds. But the human resources of the city is us, the citizenship, and I am a senior. I am ready to do something and to call upon all the seniors in San Francisco that when that case comes, that the feds show up, we're going to march in front, all the seniors. And I push wheelchairs, because still walk. And we'll go with canes, and we'll make the front line of the marches. And that's just like the mothers did in Oregon the other day, that they they close ranks and they march in front for the children in the back marching. So we will do it like seniors and let them beat me up. I've been beaten before by the cops. It won't be the first time. But I want to leave a legacy from all of us that we're going to fight for democracy. We won't let this country fall into what Trump is bringing us to, fascism. That's fascism. Clear there. There's no other way to explain that. And that's my point. It's, and I hope all the seniors listen to me and we'll march in front. I'll be the one, and I'll be there.
Okay, Ramon, thank you. Thank you for
thank you.
That's a noble sentiment. And be careful. And I wish you the best. Thank you. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Tom, how are you? Apart from concerned, as we all are. I'm beyond concerned about what's happening in Portland and what it probably portends for the, certainly other major countries around the United States, as Trump's already indicated. I wanted to remind you, I think you've probably already read, did you read Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny?
I did. He's been on this show 3 or 4 times, too.
Yeah, what a guy. Well, then, to remind people listening, since you don't need reminding, one of his 20 steps on this pathway to tyranny, you'll remember, was when paramilitaries joined forces with police to suppress peaceful protest. It is the end of the game, and the game will be over. That was, I think, his 20th step, was it not?
Yeah, I don't recall which step it was, but that was certainly one of the big red flags. Masha Gerson, I believe is her name, is also writing about the same thing.
Yes, and he was asked very recently if he thought that because, Border Patrol wasn't exactly by definition a paramilitary of any sort, did he see it as any great difference? And he said no. He said if they are acting outside of the law, which they are, they can be determined to be, in fact, paramilitaries. And he said this will be game over if people do not do everything to get out in the street. If they need to get in the street, call their representatives, call their senators, do everything humanly possible to stop this ASAP, because the next step is game over. I can't imagine anything much more serious.
Yeah.
And frightening.
And let's understand here very, very clearly. Trump is trying to reinvent 1968. He's trying to get our cities on fire so that he can run as the law and order candidate. And so when his, when the secret police, when the stormtroopers, when his SA and SS show up in your town, obviously they're not going to show up at San Cristobal, Mexico. But when I realize you're an American, and you
never know. You never know.
Yeah, but when they show up in Chicago, when they show up in Oakland, people need to respond in a non-violent fashion. Yeah,
violence will only lead to more, as we know. But I think it might even be a little worse. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but I do think it's possible to see at some point that what he wants to do is bring about so much disorder and chaos in order to declare martial law before the election, because he knows he can't win it.
And if he can federalize the cities that are controlled by Democrats, then declaring martial law and shutting down the country will be a hell of a lot easier, because he will have basically neutralized the opposition.
It would be one wonderful way to suppress yet more votes and steal the election again.
Yeah, I see this as an electoral strategy too. Yeah, it is and it isn't. I mean, we've seen this playbook before. Thank you, Nicholas. And I'm going to be talking about that in the next hour. How this is played out. How this played out in Germany. How this is played out in other countries. How it might play out here. We'll be back at the top of the hour here. It's the Thom Hartmann radio and television program, helping you win the water cooler wars, fair and only slightly unbalanced.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Sally Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws. But talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives, conspiring with their Republican allies, built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, in reality, but this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation, after 1995, into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America. Of totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. So, the NRA and the John Birch Society and all these guys. I remember when I was like 12. My dad took me to a John Birch Society. He was a Republican. He was very active with the Republicans. He thought they were nuts. I'm not sure he'd been to one of these meetings before. It was hosted by a neighbor of ours, a guy who lived down the street. And, they gave me a copy of John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason. I took it home. I read it. I was freaked out. The State Department was infiltrated with communists. Oh, my God. But back then, the right-wingers at least were saying what we're concerned about is that someday the police powers of this country may be used against its own citizens. Now, of course, they thought they were going to be used against them, which is, at that time, at least where I was, suburban white men, by and large, at that John Birch Society meeting. The NRA have been saying the same thing. They've sold millions and millions of guns. Look out, the government is going to come for you. Government thugs are going to come for you. Government jackbooted thugs, in fact, are going to come for you. I mean, but where are they? Oh, well, if the government's going after liberals, then that's fine. You guys on the right who are concerned about police power, police power is pretty awesome power. Only the police, only the government basically has the power to take away your freedom, to put you in prison, or to take away your life, to execute you, legally. If I try to confine you, that's called kidnapping. If I try to kill you, or if I do kill you, that's called murder. But when the government does it, it's under color of law, it is considered, legal jailing and lawful execution. And we should be concerned about that. So how has this played out in the past? Well, I've shared this with you before, but it's, it seems at least once a year we need to revisit Milton Mayer. In the late 1940s, early 1950s, somewhere in that time period, I'm not sure of the year, Milton Mayer, who was a reporter for, as I recall, the Chicago Sun, one of the big Chicago newspapers, went to Germany after World War II as the country was rebuilding, and spent a year there and met with and got to know and hung out with and extensively interviewed 10 Germans who had not been in the army, they had not fought in the war, they had not joined the Nazi Party, they had all managed to just basically keep their jobs and keep working through the war. And his question to each one of them was, what the hell happened here? And the book, he published this book, it's called They Thought They Were Free. It's still in print. Milton Mayer's long gone. He passed away years ago. But what these Germans told him is worth revisiting. He was talking with a bricklayer. This guy said, this separation of government from the people, this widening of the gap, took place so gradually and so insensibly, each step disguised, perhaps not even intentionally, as a temporary emergency measure or associated with true patriotic allegiance or with real social purposes. And all these crises and reforms, and there were real reforms too, so occupied the people that they did not see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me, unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us ever had the occasion to develop. And by the way, go back and look at some of the things that I was writing when George W. Bush was pushing the Patriot Act and all of this massive concentration of police power and the Department of Homeland Security, homeland being a word that has genetic roots. It's a word that was used by the Nazis. We are the homeland to the German people, which are the white people, right? And then George W. Bush pulls this word homeland out, which has never been used to describe America. We are not a genetic homeland. Unless you're Native American, you shouldn't be using the word homeland. But anyhow, back to Milton Mayer's book, the fellow he interviewed. He said, each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless you were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. And one day it's over his head. He talked to a college professor who continued to teach college all through everything. And the guy said, Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself and said that when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, so he didn't do anything. Then they attacked the socialists, he was a little more uneasy, but he wasn't a socialist, and so he didn't do anything. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on, and he was always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a church man, and he tried to do something, but then it was too late. Niemöller, by the way, his great poem, I believe, was found in a concentration camp. I may be wrong on that, but anyhow, you see, the college professor says, one doesn't see exactly where or how to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. And it's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It is also genuine uncertainty. Uncertainty is a very important factor, and instead of decreasing as time goes on, it grows. Outside in the streets, in the general community, everyone seems happy. One hears no protests, certainly sees none. You know, in France or Italy, there's slogans against the government painted on walls and fences. But in Germany, outside the great cities, maybe, you don't even have this. In the university community, in your own community, you speak privately to your colleagues, some of whom feel as you do, certainly. But what do they say? Oh, it's not so bad. You're seeing things. You're an alarmist. And you are an alarmist. You're saying that this must lead to that, but you can't prove it. These are the beginnings, yes, but how do you know for sure when you don't know the end? How do you know or even surmise how this will end? On the one hand, your enemies, the law, the regime, the party, they intimidate you. On the other hand, your colleagues poo-poo you as pessimistic or even neurotic. But that one great shocking occasion where tens or hundreds of thousands will join you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and smallest, thousands, millions would have been sufficiently shocked if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 1943 had come immediately after the German firm stickers in store windows, in the windows of non-Jewish shops in 1933. But of course, this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of tiny steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. Step C isn't so much worse than step B. And if you didn't take a stand at B, why should you at step C? And then on to step D. And then one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy. And some minor incident, in my case, it was my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying Jews, swine, collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed, and changed completely under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, is not the world you were in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, reassuring, the houses, the shops, the cinema, but the spirit has changed. Now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He ends saying, when everyone is transformed, no one is transformed, and now you live in a system which rules without responsibility even to God. And welcome back. John in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, John, what's up?
Washington State primary, August 4th. A person called up on a local radio station. I knew that she was kind of credible, but I had to look it up on the internet. This is the Republican primary. There are candidates running saying Trump Republican Party candidate.
Yeah, we had a caller to the show yesterday, a woman who lives over in Camas, Washington, saying the same thing.
She got the one. Trump Republican Party. But anyway, I just let you know it's going a little bit further than what you've been talking about. Maybe not, but yeah. But anyway, I had to look it up to see if it was true, and it was.
It is.
But anyway, thanks for your time. Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, John. Good to hear from you. Jack in Folsom, California. Hey, Jack, what's up?
Hey, yeah, Tom. What level of federal protective activity would be appropriate in your mind if what they're claiming at the federal building there is under some kind of siege?
Well, first of all, generally speaking, in any city in the United States, the level of federal involvement in local law enforcement should be what the local authorities ask for, number one. Number two, federal buildings are owned by the federal government, so they're technically not Oregon property or Illinois property or New York property, and the federal government has the right to police their own buildings. But in that context, I don't believe, and this is probably something that's going to end up in the courts, but I don't believe that federal officials have the right to leave that building and pursue people, residents of the local community that they think might have done something to that building. In the case of Oregon, specifically, people who are spraying graffiti on it. That, in those cases, what they should be doing is taking pictures of those people to the extent that they can identify folks doing the tagging and things like that, and turn it over to local authorities for local prosecution. Why do you ask, Jack?
Well, I just wondered, because it does seem like a legitimate issue, how far the federal government can go to protect its own buildings, whether or not a local official wants them to.
Yeah, the reality is that the federal building here in Portland was outside of having graffiti sprayed on it, which okay, we can stop that, they could stop that, but outside of that, there, to the best of my knowledge, there was no actual threat to any of their buildings. But this is out of their monument police. Keep in mind, Donald Trump created a police force within DHS specifically to protect, quote, monuments and federal buildings. And so the monument police, I mean, who's he going to recruit for the monument police? It's going to be the white supremacist guys within the federal military. And I think that that's what we're seeing here, Jack. I really do.
Well, the second question I have is, and I enjoy when you have Congressman Zakana on, because he's one Democrat who is skeptical of our continued military presence in the streets of Kabul and in Iraqi streets and in Syria. But I don't hear that from many of your callers. I don't hear the same outrage or passion that is being expressed over federal presence in Portland. And I'm just wondering whether it's time for some consistency on the left.
Well, I think that right across the board in the United States, you don't hear people yelling about what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq because it doesn't directly affect them. There's fewer than 5% of American families have somebody active, in active duty military. The military represents about 2% of our 1 or 2% of our population. It's an unfortunate reality. It's why we need a draft. Jack, thanks but it's a completely separate thing from what's going on in the streets of our cities. We'll be back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wanted to dig into some of the things that are going on with regard to COVID right now. In Los Angeles, 15 kids are sick with this MIS-C, MIS-C-C. This is the inflammatory syndrome that's associated with COVID. There are 2,216 people in the hospital. This is as of July 20th, AFP, but the last dates that they have are the 15th. And at that point, 26% were in ICUs, 19% are on ventilators. Of course, when they put you on a ventilator, they render you unconscious. They put you in a coma. And then they stick a tube down your throat into your lungs to breathe for you. 1 in 5 people that goes into the hospital right now in Los Angeles has been intubated. And this from Barbara Ferrer, the county's public health director, Los Angeles County. Right now, young adults are being hospitalized at a rate not seen before. No matter how young you are vulnerable to this virus. More than half of the cases reported on Sunday, this was last Sunday, concerned people less than 41 years old. And then 15 of these children now are sick with MIS-C, which is a condition where different body parts can become inflamed, including the heart, lungs, kidneys, brain, skin, eyes, or gastrointestinal organs. So far, there have been 6 deaths related to the syndrome nationwide, according to health officials. So, at the same time, Congress is trying to pass money for expanded testing, so fewer children will get sick. And local communities and teachers' unions, the teachers' union down in Florida has just sued, said we don't want to go back to work under these circumstances and in these conditions. And Trump and the Trump Republicans are pushing hard to get kids back into schools, and encouraging people not to wear face masks. And I think this is part of the maximum chaos strategy. This is Donald Trump creating his Reichstag fire. This is what kicked off Adolf Hitler, was when Marius van der Lubbe, this 20-year-old Dutch communist, who most biographies indicate was either profoundly mentally retarded or mentally ill, was smuggled through the underground connection into the Reichstag, into the Parliament building, was smuggled from one of the congressional offices of one of the Nazi Party members, into the Reichstag building. And in that building, they had this long hallway, which was filled with these old tapestries dating back to the 1500s. And he just went through and lit them on fire, and the building went up. And Adolf Hitler runs over to, they set up a microphone in front of the building, and Hitler is standing, and he wanted to become chancellor. He was having lunch with von Papen when this happened. And he went over and he got on that microphone and said to a nationwide audience, "This is a sign from God, and we need to bring law and order to Germany." Juan Cole, professor of history at the University of Michigan, writes, Trump's re-election strategy is to scare the white suburbs, which polls show are souring on him. And it now appears clear that part of that strategy is to send federal agents dressed like Iraq war troops. I mean, why are these guys wearing camouflage? That's desert camo, right? There's desert camo, there's jungle camo. I mean, you've got different kinds of camouflage depending on the environment you're in. Portland, Oregon is not a desert. Back to Juan Cole. It appears the part of Trump's re-election strategy is to send federal agents dressed like Iraq war troops to Democratic-run cities on the pretext of protecting federal property, and then to attack and provoke Black Lives Matter and defund the police protesters, causing violence to escalate and using it to scare the suburbs. He says the exercise has the advantage for Trump of entrenching a new form of secret police and of turning federal agents into instruments of his authoritarianism. Meanwhile, a law firm in Wisconsin has an offer for teachers in Wisconsin. We will write your wills for free if you're going to go back and teach. Right? We blew it on testing. Trump turned testing. He gave millions and millions of dollars in grants to Quest and there's one other company. The name of it is escaping me at the moment, but I got a story about Quest here in front of me. There were two testing companies he gave millions of dollars to, and they came up with the coronavirus test. Well, these are still largely centralized, and these tests are largely being done by these for-profit companies. And now Quest Diagnostics is saying 7 or more days for testing. No money earmarked for our schools. We've got a massive surge of hospitalization. 24% of hospital beds in Arizona are coronavirus cases now. In Texas, it's 1 in 5. And here in Oregon, this from Amy Green in the Oregonian, our local newspaper owned by a New York company. It's taken up to 14 days for Oregonians to learn if they've contracted the novel coronavirus, according to the Oregon Health Authority. By then, they might have already infected untold others. It's rendering contact tracing ineffective. Dr. Jennifer Vines, the health officer for Multnomah County, that's Portland, said, this, of course, makes our ability to keep up with the virus very difficult. Yeah, you think? And it's because demand for testing is soaring in the red states, in Florida, in Arizona, in Texas, and in California as well, where they've got crisis. And we're having to use these national testing agencies because this is what the federal government set up for us. This is an absolute screaming mess. And now Trump wants to bring federalized police dressed like Iraq war soldiers into cities where he is going to try to provoke clashes with Black Lives Matter and defund the police folks explicitly, specifically. This is how it ends. This is how it starts, I should say. There's a new Lincoln Project ad out saying this is how it starts. And basically, hey, this is how fascism starts. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this. How do you think your city's going to respond to this? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Do you think this is going to work for Donald Trump? It certainly seems to be working over on Fox News. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump, by Ian Refowitz, or Refowitz. Donald Trump owns, this is from the first chapter, Donald Trump owns conservative media 100% lock, stock, and barrel. Full of bluster and bombast, Trump uses modern media tools like Twitter to directly blast the nation with his unfiltered, uninformed, and uncivil messages at full volume. To those outside the conservative media bubble, it may seem as though Trump is the entire ballgame. Sure, Fox News is a presence, but the news channel has reconstituted itself these days as state media, singular in purpose, to prop up Trump's candidacy. Whatever the, quote, conservative message might be these days, it doesn't exist without Trump. It's Trump who sets the agenda. It is Trump who determines the message, and it is Trump who decides who best can sell it. 10 out of 10 times, it's Trump. Thus, in this world of Trump, 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 and more Trump, it is easy for the uninitiated to forget that in addition to the president's Twitter account, conservatives have built a massive media machine to promote a message that is often at odds with reality and the American mainstream. Forged in the aftermath of Barry Goldwater's 1964 landslide loss, this massive network of conservative TV, radio, print, and online outlets have allowed them to build an alternative reality so powerful and convincing that entire swaths of the country are held in thrall. A Pew study in 2017 found that 40% of Trump voters relied on Fox News as their main source of news. Meanwhile, only 3% of Hillary Clinton voters relied on any cable news channel as their primary source of information. Conservative websites like the Daily Caller and Breitbart reach millions. Social media like Facebook and Twitter is awash in conservative voices, further amplified by Russian bots. And the dark web has given voice to the darkest fringes of the conservative world, from white supremacists to conspiracy theorists like the QAnon crew, convinced of a deep state conspiracy against Trump, fueled by child sex traffickers like Hillary Clinton. But nothing reaches more conservative voices than AM radio. Once the province of music stations, the emergence of FM radio led to a mass migration to the higher quality band that left AM radio in severe decline. Talk radio didn't require that same level of quality audio, and station operators embraced the format. The elimination of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987 made it possible for conservatives to take over the dial without concern that political balance was required. And in 1988, a certain Rush Limbaugh launched his nationally syndicated show. It's hard to overstate just how dramatically important Limbaugh has been in defining conservative thought and ideology, with an audience that has at times reached into the tens of millions. No single conservative personality outside of modern-day Trump has had this kind of reach or influence. And unlike Fox News, which actively makes conservatives stupid, Limbaugh's method of misinformation has always been rooted in a more solid foundation of truthiness. A 2007 survey by Pew Research found that Limbaugh listeners demonstrated among the highest knowledge levels in response to a battery of political current affairs questions, with 79% having either a high or moderate level. Among Fox News viewers, the number was only 65%, second to last, with nightly news watchers faring worse. Here's a funny aside. The most informed were watchers of Comedy Central's Daily Show and Colbert Report, also at 79% combined, but with a larger number of high levels of knowledge. But knowing the names of the Vice President, Governor, and Speaker of the House is only base-level knowledge. Limbaugh may accurately impart such information, but as this book shows, his pernicious twisting of facts, out-of-context quotes, and toxic editorializing have done far worse damage to our country than whether someone knows or doesn't know the name of the Supreme Court, of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. If you are anything like me, the sheer amount of misinformation stated by Rush Limbaugh in the pages ahead will shock and anger you deeply. Not just about how Limbaugh twisted the truth. As Ian notes early on, Limbaugh launched his coverage of the Obama presidency with four simple words: I hope he fails. With that goal in mind, nothing would stop Limbaugh from spending the next years reinforcing the narrative of failure. The truth never stood a chance. What makes this so infuriating is that Limbaugh decided that lies and policy differences weren't enough to make Obama a failure. Instead, he had to other him, turning white America against him. And he did that with pure, unfiltered, unadulterated racism. I was shocked when Ian first told me about this project. He's literally going to go through 8 years of Rush Limbaugh transcripts. I was shocked again when he told me he was finished. He actually read 8 years of Rush Limbaugh transcripts, but that was nothing like the jolt from seeing the result of that thankless labor. His comprehensive transcribing of Limbaugh's hate, always in full context. What these pages show are the words of a white supremacist. And you'll find yourself, like me, wondering how the hell he has gotten away with talking like a KKK Grand Dragon in modern-day America. There's nothing subtle about what you're about to read. For example, when Barack Obama talked about the disparities in policing between white and black Americans, as objective and uncontroversial an observation as possible, Limbaugh happily ranted about the president carrying out, quote, a purposeful effort here to divide people in this country along racial lines, end quote. Pointing out racism to conservatives is always worse than the actual racism itself. The book, The Tribalization of Politics by Ian Refowitz. On the Science Revolution, Sonia Shah, author of Pandemic, is here, and she says it's time to tell a new story about coronavirus. Our lives depend on it. Dr. Enric Sala with National Geographic tells us how the benefits of protecting 30% of the planet will outweigh the costs. Lily Eskelsen-Garcia with the National Education Association, the NEA, is dropping by. How's America going to protect our children as Trump and DeVos force them back into school? And Charlie Jang with Greenpeace USA is here about how a Green New Deal and the DNC will get along. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. You know, the only two presidents who were ever impeached, thus, credibly accused of crimes that rose to the level of impeachment, and then those crimes were indicted in the House of Representatives with an impeachment vote and tried in the United States Senate. The only two presidents that had that happen, by coincidence, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence, are the only two presidents whose Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel wrote a memo saying you can't arrest a sitting president. What he's doing is too important. He's too busy. He would never go out on the golf course 1/3 of his presidency. He's busy. You can't arrest him. And Trump now is claiming that not only can't you arrest him, you can't even investigate him, even if he commits murder. Anyway, we've got a video about a president who actually did get arrested for a crime and convicted of it. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. It's one of our listener-supported videos. Check it out. Tag, you're in. Okay, in the news right now, Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, right-wing cuckoo bird here in Florida, going nuts on Liz Cheney in a meeting this morning in Washington, D.C. Liz Cheney, of course, is, I believe, number 3 in Republican leadership, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. And Gaetz writes, Liz has worked behind the scenes and now in public against Donald Trump and his agenda. House Republicans deserve better. As our conference chair, Liz Cheney should step down or be removed. He was joined by Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, Chip Roy of Texas, Louis Gohmert of Texas, Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona, Jim Jordan of Ohio. Every single one of them got up and denounced Liz Cheney. She apparently was speaking back. So, I think the takeaway from this is when a crazed right-winger like Lynn Cheney isn't hard right enough for the Tea Party funded, the billionaire, the Koch brothers funded members of the House of Representatives, we should all get very, very nervous. The right is rapidly collapsing into the extreme right is becoming the fascist right. I don't know any other way to say it. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, a prosecutor there is going after a woman by the name of Lanisha Bratcher. She's 32 years old. She voted in 2016 in North Carolina when she was on probation. She didn't know that the law in North Carolina says when you're on probation, you can't vote. This all comes out of the 13th Amendment, not ending slavery in the United States, but merely relegating slavery to those people who've been convicted of a crime. It's the reason why we have, 4 or 5 times more people in jail than any other country in the world. In fact, we are 4% of the world's population, and we have 25% of the world's prisoners. No, it's not an accident. So, when you're a slave, you have no rights. You don't have a right to vote in North Carolina. And so she voted, and now, well, this is the story, Sam Levine writing for The Guardian. The headline, a black woman faces prison for a voting mistake. Prosecutors just doubled the charge. A North Carolina prosecutor accused of using a racist law to prosecute an African-American woman for voter fraud has now doubled the charges against her, The Guardian has learned. Bratcher said she had no idea she was ineligible to vote, but the district attorney in Hoke County, where she voted, decided to charge her with a Class 1 felony. She's faced up to 19 months in prison. The case has been pending since last year. She's expecting her 3rd child in December, by the way. In early June, the district attorney's office brought new charges against her. 2 new grand jury indictments against her. This is mind-boggling. The basic message here, and I'm sure that the GOP is very, very happy that this is being publicized. The basic message here from Republicans in North Carolina is to black people, do not even dare to vote. We may find a way to put you in jail. Don't even think about it. It's the only way they can win. Hartmut in Kennesaw, Georgia. Hey, Hartmut, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hello, Tom. I'm so glad that I'm getting a chance to thank you for introducing me to that book. They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer. It's such a beautiful. It turns out, as soon as I heard about it from you, I immediately went to my favorite Remainder store, bookstore, the Book Finder, and I found there are plenty of copies left there for people who might be interested. It's a tremendous book. It's so beautifully written, and it's so erudite. But for me, I'm German myself, and my father was an engineer, a part of the rocket team with von Braun, and when he wrote his memoirs, he commented on something that comes up in the book, which I found so surprising when I read it there, namely that the German subjects that Milton Mayer was interviewing, without a single exception, they thought of the Hitler period, and actually not the part of that brought them into the war, but the years beforehand, from 1933 to 39 or 40, they considered that the golden age of Germany, the golden age. And my father...
Well, in 1937, Adolf Hitler was on the cover of Time magazine. He was the man of the year, and he was literally the most popular politician in the world in 1937.
Yeah, well, he certainly was. My father, in his memoirs, this is 48 years after the end of World War II, my father still writes glowingly of how he went to, when he started college, he thought there was no chance he would ever get to work in his field because there were no jobs. And suddenly, there the industrialists were coming to the university to hire them before they had even graduated. He still was talking about that. He could still, in other words, the very thought of that period of time was not in any way laced with the ugly thought of what came afterwards.
Right, it's absolutely true, Hartmann, and in fact. If you look at that period from basically 1929 to 1933, when Hitler rose to power, millions and millions of people. We had 20% unemployment here in the United States. So did Germany. The Great Depression hit the entire world, and Germany, as an industrialized power, got hit really, really badly. And of course, they were also hit badly by the Treaty of Versailles reparations that they had to pay for World War I, and that was something John Maynard Keynes accurately predicted. But the bottom line is that we had two countries, the United States and Germany, that were in the same economic crisis. We chose Franklin Roosevelt, And he put the country back together, and he built the largest middle class the world had ever seen, literally. And Hitler put Germany back together. And yes, he made the trains run, he built the Autobahn, he invented the Volkswagen and sold millions of them, brought prosperity to Germany by 1937 when he was on the cover of Time magazine, but did it all in the context of building a fascist machine.
Yeah,
which FDR was absolutely not doing. And
yeah, the
frankly, I
politics
think
were different, but really, in a sense, Hitler was a Keynesian. I mean, the tremendous amount of money that was spent on infrastructures got the economy going again in Germany. And I thought about that when you were talking about what can we learn from the Nazi experience in Germany. And it occurred to me that one of the things that we know is that terribly important part of the Nazi experience, namely that they loved that they had a golden age, that is not going to be as anything to hold Trump in good stead with the American people. This is not going to be a golden age that we're going to remember Trump by. So I suppose if there's a silver lining here somehow, there's going to be the very opposite sentiment prevailing in the United States.
Well, and this is, when I was reading from They Thought They Were Free, Hartmut, I was, he was talking about how all these gradual steps, these thousands of gradual steps until finally you're like way outside anything normal. And that, for me, was the Bush administration, frankly. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security and even the word homeland, the consolidation of police powers, the massive consolidation of power within the executive branch, creating a massive spying apparatus that could be directed against American civilians. That, we sleepwalked through the Bush years, and that laid the foundation for the Trump years. And it's a real tragedy that more couldn't have been done during the Obama years to reverse that. But Hartmut, it's a fascinating conversation. Thank you for calling and contributing to it. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay with us. More to come right after this. And welcome back. Heather in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Heather, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I need to pick your brain for a moment because I've got the spider web of what is motivating Trump. Now, we all know he's a very small coward of a man, but he wants to be seen as the big dictator, big strong man. That's his purpose, seemingly, is to impress men like Putin. But the stuff that's happening now, the racism, not that he's not probably a racist, seems to be coming from the Stephen Miller influence. But the other stuff, this authoritarian dictator, fascist police force stuff that we're seeing to start spread, it sounds like Steve Bannon. And it reeks of his ideology. And I'm just wondering, where the heck is Steve Bannon? Did their break? Was that all theatrical? Is he still whispering in his ear? Because his ideology
Trump said that
about
on Fox News.
Socialism down and independent thought and moderns taking away from the middle class. I mean, all of that stuff is him. So where is he? And
when Trump was interviewed by Chris Wallace on Fox News on Sunday, he said Steve Bannon he said it's better that Steve is not in government because he can help us even more, or words to that effect. You can go back and watch the interview, but he specifically talked about
I'll have to watch the whole thing. I've only seen clips as they've been posted.
And Bannon is living in Europe. He's got this old castle in Italy, and they've turned it into a right-wing paramilitary training center.
So he's living out of reach.
I understand from what I've read. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was trying to think, where is this all going? And I thought maybe we should look into a little bit more again about Steve Bannon's ideology and just see if there are things specifically that we can do to help head this off, to avoid so that Trump doesn't have the power to have the reactionary behavior that's going on to say, oh, well, then I'm going to do this, because we know he aches for power, but he's motivated by fame and money. And the rest of it is beyond him. He's adult. He can't see past.
Yeah, well, and that's why the real danger, Heather, is going to be when Tom Cotton runs for president in 4 years. Because he's an unrepentant fascist and militarist, and he's a very, very, very smart man. And you want to see America go fascist really rapidly, get Tom Cotton in the White House. Heather, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Richard in Naples, Florida. Richard, what's up?
Tom, thank you so much. It's an honor to talk with you. Listen, I just wish that the excitement about this issue going on was not so severe, so devastating in terms of the potential outcome. Anyhow, my point of view is that there's a potential here for a history to have been to record at some point that Putin really had a lot more to do with what's going on right now. Obama, when Obama left the White House, I believe he told Putin, he certainly told the rest of us, not Putin, but told Trump, he certainly told the rest of us that there's concern that the election might have been rigged by the Russians.
Right.
So I hear the sound there, Tom. Do I need to quit?
Yeah, no, Richard, I don't disagree. This is certainly Putin's playbook, but it's also the playbook of pretty much every other dictator in history. I mean, Machiavelli wrote this in the 1600s. This is, as I recall, this is an ancient way that fascist dictators basically rise to power. Richard, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at ThomHartmann.com, this week, it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, well, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad, when the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Oh, welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, a lot of what you've been talking about today was very, very prevalent in my mind. But about what's happened in Portland, on the TV show I've mentioned before that I watched regularly in the early 20s, when George Bush formed the Homeland Security, there were times when our military went in and did, just practice runs of dropping into a town by surprise and giving the people a good scare for their life to give them an idea of what that would be like. Now, they actually showed a segment of that on the TV show. So what's going on now has been going on in different places around the country, trying to educate people. And our military is the big backer of all of this. And I don't know if you can find out where those events happened, but I actually did see one. And what's going on now is just the beginning of what they've been practicing for years. And I think of Homeland Security.
I remember that.
Yeah, and well, I do. And Homeland Security reminds me of the fatherland of Germany and the SS and the Gestapo, because they are not for you and me. They're there for the government to try to control the people. Now, we own this country, the American people. The federal buildings and everything belong to the people.
In theory, at least.
Yeah, and Trump was a 4-year employee, not a ruler, but a man that was put in
well, I
office.
guarantee you he doesn't think that way, Joan. I mean, what you are seeing right now is basically Trump seizing control of the whole thing. Joan, you're right on. You're spot on. Thank you very much for the call. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's up?
Hello, Tom.
George?
Hello.
Hey, you're on the air.
Okay, I couldn't hear you there for a second. I just have a small point to make, not especially profound. But when Putin and the Russians invaded, Crimea and eastern Ukraine, they did so with troops in plain uniforms with no patches, no ID badges, no name tags, no nothing. And now we see the same thing in Portland. I just wonder if Trump called his master in the Kremlin to ask for advice before he started this abomination.
It's entirely possible. It's also possible that this has been done by other governments throughout history. I just don't know. But it is an eerie parallel, George. I'm totally.
And it's very.
Thank you very much for the. Oh, I'm sorry, George. We've got a slight time delay here. I thought you were done. Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was listening with great interest to your description of the author's book about Germany, and I was also very fascinated by the caller who, was of German heritage and told the story of the Golden Age. And another caller I agree with too. Trump has provided us with no golden age that we're going to sit back and remember him fondly. My fear with Trump is that he's gone too far. What is he doing with the private army? When did that happen? How did he do that? And this is definitely what he's amassed. And Stephen Miller and probably Bannon are hip deep in this. And I do have to say something to the people who are protesting. Be wary of these people. They are psychopaths. They are nuts. They've been kicked out of every decent organization, and they're probably mercenaries. If not, then they're private security forces. But these people are dangerous. They will crack your head open without thinking twice about it. And I do remember in the 60s, we were going to go on a family vacation, and there were cities that were on fire. Nixon pales in comparison to what Trump is up to, and it worries me greatly because we're dealing with the pathology of a very, very sick man. So good show, Tom. Nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Spot on. Maria in Los Angeles. You got the last minute of the hour, Maria. What's up?
Oh, thank you, Tom, for taking my call. I just had a question about the secret police. Is there any investigations going on who owns them or who's funding them? And is the American people?
Well, yeah, Congress is trying to get to the bottom of this, Maria, but the administration is refusing to give them any information. Democrats in Congress are asking, who are these people? In fact, there's a lawsuit. Our Attorney General here in Oregon has sued the federal government and John Does 1 through 10. The people who were who shot this peaceful protester in the face, and he's still in the hospital with a fractured skull and shattered face bones.
That's the thing. Are they just a rogue group that we're just not going to know?
I don't think if
where
the
they're
president sends
from?
them in, you can call them rogue. I mean, unless you would call the president rogue, and that's a tough thing to do. So, Maria, thank you for the call. It's at what we're seeing now. It's real interesting because the Lincoln Project and Republican voters against Trump. You've got conservatives and Liz Cheney. You've got conservatives coming out now saying we have crossed the threshold. We are beyond the pale. That's a good thing, but it's also a frightening thing. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what happens when an administration comes into power and decides to replace the protectors with the predators? When the USDA is being run by a lobbyist, when the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is being run by a lobbyist, when the Defense Department is being run by a lobbyist, the Justice Department, well, Bill Barr, I'm not sure you could call him a lobbyist, but a fascist. What happens? It's starting to get real. It's starting to get very, very real. Jenny Harbine is with us. She's the staff attorney for Earth Justice, earthjustice.org, the Twitter handle Earth Justice. And Jenny, tell us about how the Trump administration, and I'm assuming the Interior Department plays some role in this, are dealing with leasing federal lands to coal miners.
Well, the Trump administration, first of all, thank you very much, Tom, for having me on the show. The Trump administration, from its very first days, began making good on a campaign promise to try to revive the coal industry by rolling back regulations that are designed to protect you and me. They're designed to protect the health of our planet and the health of our people. And the Trump administration committed to rolling back these regulations in really what's a desperate attempt to keep the
failing coal industry alive. And so in March 2017, in the very early days of the administration, the Trump administration lifted a moratorium on federal coal leasing, and in doing so opened up the entire federal mineral estate, covering 570 million acres of public land owned by you and me, to exploitation by coal companies.
So what is specifically happening right now? I mean, are there coal companies? Is this all in the process, in kind of the legal, moving paperwork around stage, or has somebody showed up with, trucks and digging machines and however, explosives, however they're going to take the coal out? And are these are federal lands, right? These are the parks that are the federal lands that Teddy Roosevelt helped create.
Yeah, these are federal lands. These are lands owned by you and me. 85% of the mining of federal coal occurs on federal public lands in the Powder River Basin, primarily in Montana and Wyoming. But there's currently coal mining happening on federal public lands in 12 states, over 300 leases. So, of course, we have existing mining happening in these public lands, and there are still a host of mining companies that have lease applications pending that are trying to get their hands on more of our publicly owned coal. Currently, there's 6.5 billion tons of unmined coal on federal public lands that the government considers recoverable or economically mineable by these companies. And the Trump administration wants to open the floodgates to this mining that's so harmful to our communities, our health, our water, our air, and, very significantly, our climate. And we filed a lawsuit, or Justice filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Northern Cheyenne Tribe and a host of conservation organizations in 2017. In fact, the day that the administration took this unlawful action, and we won that lawsuit. Last year, a federal district court in Montana said it was illegal for the Trump administration to open up these public lands to mining without going through the legally required process of evaluating the environmental consequences of that decision. But the Trump administration did, in our case, what it's done in so many other cases, which is slap together a document that it says will comply with the court's order, puts it in front of the court and says, mission accomplished. We satisfied, we checked all the boxes of the required environmental review, and now we're good to go. And so, although we won that first lawsuit, we're now back in court challenging the Trump administration's really inadequate and I would say even immoral analysis of the consequences of this very significant decision to reopen our public lands to coal leasing.
Remarkable. We're talking with the staff attorney for Earth Justice, Jenny Harbine. How do you, Trump is in office for another 4 or 5 months, arguably 6 months, I guess, until January 20th, assuming that he doesn't get reelected, which may not be a safe assumption, but nonetheless. Do you see this being resolved within that time window, or, and what can the average person who might be listening to this conversation do to support the efforts that you guys are taking to try to, basically defend our country against more carbon pollution and our lands against being more ravaged by these miners?
Those are great questions, Tom. I'll take the second one first, which is what can people do? And, I have been so heartened in the wake of the 2016 election to see how ordinary people are standing up and saying this is not acceptable. Not only are folks taking to the streets to hold this administration, our elected officials, accountable to the law, to the science, to the public trust. People are really taking action into their own hands and making responsible choices about, their day-to-day activities. How do we make decisions about activities that are going to increase our carbon footprint? Increasingly, I think that personal accountability by states and cities and tribes are coming into the fore as we've seen this just federal vacuum when it comes to responsible climate policy. As to whether this issue will be resolved, the answer is no. This case will go beyond the Trump administration if we have a new president in November. But if left unchallenged, of course, this decision would remain, and its harmful impacts would continue to impact our communities and our air and water and climate. And, I don't know if this is an apt analogy, but I'm thinking about the waning days here, or what may be the waning days of the Trump administration in comparison with the waning days of, coal industry, which is that, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can see that we have an energy future that's cleaner, more sustainable, affordable, and doesn't cause these disproportionate impacts on the American people and across the globe. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but the Trump administration and the coal industry alike can cause a tremendous amount of harm in their death throes. And this lawsuit is aiming to prevent that harm, both by the administration and the coal industry, frankly.
Yeah. Jenny Harbine with earthtojustice.org. Jenny, thank you. Keep up the great work. Thanks for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, good talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're going to be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Karen in Cleveland, Ohio, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Karen, what's up?
I had a suggestion for the mayors of for the mayors of Portland and Chicago and who else it may be to kind of take the bull by the horns, and when the feds show up, just go into lockdown again, as we did at the beginning of the pandemic. Let essential workers go to work, but basically, entreat the people to just stay off the streets. And if everybody or a lot of people stay off the streets, then the feds have nothing to do. And, I guess that I would hope that after a few days of that, the feds would leave. My thought.
Yeah, sadly, I don't think it'll play out that easily, Karen. I get your point. I understand your point. But Trump wants a fight. Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, apparently wants a fight. Ted Wheeler here in Portland is doing a fight in the courts. But I don't think this is going to end well. I'm very concerned about it. But your point is well taken. Karen. Thank you for the call. John in Minneapolis, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I think that the groundwork for this kind of process by a president has been laid by the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act, as far as I know, it was, reauthorized. But I don't think they ever really, worked out a lot of the bugs. Like, for instance, this could happen to you if you say we're at a conference with the FARC in Colombia, and this happened to a person here in Minneapolis. They were just representing a peace group, and they were with both FARC and Colombian people or Colombian government officials. And as a result, they, were giving support to a terrorist organization by even just being there. And this had happened in like 2009 and 10, and they had raids throughout Minneapolis. They had some in Chicago. It went throughout the whole country, and it's just fallen off the radar. And I don't know whatever happened with it here. Most of these people are just ordinary activists, and they would go to their house. I don't think they even had a search warrant. They just, went in, took all their stuff, took their computer, took their, laptops and their cell phones, and,
It's like what happened in Minneapolis itself just before the RNC.
It's around the same time. There was the same.
Or was it 8 years ago?
Yeah. There was another incident where provocateurs were involved. The RNC welcoming committee, one of which was a person who was paid by and contracted by the federal government to egg on the RNC to do, I believe it was more aggressive actions like throw Molotov cocktails. And I don't think anything really, it went to court. The person was charged under I believe it was a Patriot Act. I don't remember anything happening.
This is very problematic. It's why a lot of us were yelling and screaming about the Patriot Act back during the George W. Bush years, that this was setting the country up for a fascist takeover. And sure enough, it did. John, thank you for the call, and thanks for your comments. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Tony Corbo will be with us in just a moment. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tony Corbo is on the line. He's a senior lobbyist at Food and Water Watch's food campaign, Food and Water Watch AND. Foodandwaterwatch.org is the website, and Food and Water. Food and Water is the Twitter handle. Tony, welcome to the program. It's okay for us to eat chickens that have cancer. Do I have that right?
Well, that's what USDA has decided to do in granting a petition filed by the National Chicken Council.
So why does the National Chicken Council feel it's important that Americans eat chickens who are infected with cancer?
Well, they filed a petition on March the 1st, 2019. Arguing that avian leukosis, which is a viral condition in poultry that causes tumors to appear on the skin of chickens and also in the various organs, is not a food safety issue. And in fact, the way that USDA had wanted them to sample for leukosis was an undue burden on the industry. And so they filed a petition asking that the sampling regime be abolished, and that if a chicken carcass appeared to have leukosis, all that needed to be done was to trim, to use a knife to eliminate the tumor. Up until now, if a chicken carcass had leukosis, the carcass would be condemned. The entire carcass would be condemned and removed from entering the food supply.
Right. Is this, we know that there are viruses that cause cancer. Probably the most famous one for humans is the human papillomavirus. which causes uterine cancer and throat cancer and other kinds of cancer. So, here we've got with chickens a virus that is causing tumors. Is there a concern that this virus may be a human pathogen? Is there a legitimate health concern here around this issue, or is this more, oh, that's pretty grody, we're eating tumors?
Well, I mean, the thing is that it's not as COVID is, a zoonotic disease that can be transmitted from an animal to humans. But up until now, the USDA has considered leukosis to be a condition that is unwholesome. And so, from a food safety standpoint, where you could contract a disease from eating chicken that had leukosis, no. But it is a gross condition, and so USDA ever since the Poultry Products Inspection Act went into effect in 1957, this particular disease was considered to be unwholesome, and carcasses had to be destroyed from entering the food supply.
Is this virus starting to rip through? I mean, back in 1957, most chickens that were consumed by humans in the United States were probably grown on small family farms. I mean, this explosion of factory farming really, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it came out of the 1980s by and large, late 70s through the early 90s. And now basically most of our chicken is coming out of these giant factory farms, which are just like breeding pits. Is that what's happened here? That when you've got 1 million chickens in a facility and you've got an infectious virus that causes tumors, that you just can't stop it, and so hey, America's just got to eat this stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's you make a very valid point, because of the way farming has changed, and we have these massive operations that once a virus makes it into a flock, it'll spread like wildfire. And so while there are vaccinations that can control this virus, it's not completely been eradicated. So what essentially the Chicken Council is saying, don't look for it anymore. Just even if you have chickens that are infected with this particular virus, it's okay, because it's not a food safety concern, and so we're going to allow sick chickens essentially to go onto our dinner tables. Right.
A large chunk of the animal products, of the animals that we feed and slaughter in the United States, are actually shipped overseas. China is the largest market. In fact, the largest pork producer in America, I believe it's Smithfield, is an entirely Chinese, or a largely Chinese-owned company. And at the time that that Donald Trump was saying, oh, there's going to be a shortage of meat, and the industry was saying there's going to be a shortage of meat, they'd actually increased their exports to China at the time. Is that the case with chicken as well? And is there going to be a backlash by foreign importers of U.S. chicken to this? I mean, is this something that could, take a bite out of the industry, or do they have some way around it? Because the Japanese in particular, I know, American exports, they're very, concerned about.
No, it could very well, impact our export markets. I mean, it's interesting that when the Poultry Products Inspection Act was passed by Congress in 1957, it explicitly said we have to remove unwholesome poultry from the food supply because it can impact the industry both domestically and for our export markets. And China has resumed importing poultry products from the United States, and it stopped for a while as part of the wonderful trade war that Trump started. But the poultry exports have resumed to China and to other markets. So this could have an impact on the export market.
Yeah, it's remarkable stuff. Tony Corbo, he's with Food and Water Watch's food campaign. Food and A&D, foodandwaterwatch.org is the website, and Food and Water is the Twitter handle. Tony, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Thanks, Tom.
Appreciate it. It's fascinating stuff. We'll be back with your calls right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. A lot in the news today. We'll continue the conversations about politics,
listening
too.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
For example, Donald Trump's habit of not paying his bills looks like it's catching up with him. I'll tell you about that in a little while. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. On the Science Revolution, Sonia Shaw, author of Pandemic, is here, and she says it's time to tell a new story about coronavirus. Our lives depend on it. Dr. Enric Sala with National Geographic tells us how the benefits of protecting 30% of the planet will outweigh the costs. Lily Eskelsen-Garcia with the National Education Association, the NEA, is dropping by. How is America going to protect our children as Trump and DeVos force them back into school? And Charlie Jang with Greenpeace USA is here about how a Green New Deal and the DNC will get along. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Hey, we have a new video up for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about Steve Wilson and Jane Aker, who were guests on this program back in the early 2000s. A couple of reporters for a Fox television station down in Florida who put together an investigative report on bovine growth hormone that Monsanto tried to squash. The Fox station told them that they had to actually lie on the air, saying that there was no health risks associated with GBH, what's now called RGBH. They refused to lie. They got fired. They appealed. They went to court. They won a judgment against the Fox station. And then the Fox station appealed that, and the appeals court said, no, it's okay for a TV station to order their reporters to lie on the air. And that's been the law ever since. It was 2002, 2003. And you combine that with the Telecommunications Act of 96, and we have an insane media landscape. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Melvin in Huntsville, Texas. Hey, Melvin, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. And thanks for your patience. What's up?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Tom?
Just fine.
Okay, great. Listen, I was listening to your show. I've been listening for quite a while, and I love your show. And when you were talking about the federal forces with the unmarked uniforms and so on and so forth, and how bad it's getting and how closer to the election, the strategy that Trump may be having is similar to some of the Hitler tactics. Okay, I'm retired from the military, and I find it hard to find that the military leaders will stand by and watch all of this madness happen. Because when I joined the military, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I didn't pledge to protect Trump or the president. It's the Constitution that I took an oath to defend. And I would bet money that military leaders would not just stand on the sidelines and watch this chaos go on. They would step in and put an end to it. What's your take on it?
Well, Trump has been replacing military leaders. You know, General Milley, I'm guessing, is probably in trouble right now. He's on his, fourth Secretary of Defense right now? Who's, I get it, a civilian in charge of the military, but I'm guessing, Melvin, that any resistance to Trump coming out of the military is going to mostly come from your commissioned officers. It's going to come from those who have, who are college graduates who probably did a little deeper dive into the Constitution. A lot of the enlisted men and women probably never really studied the Constitution. We haven't taught civics in the United States since the 1980s when Bill Bennett took that out of our federal curriculum requirements. And so I'm quite concerned. I mean, I look at these guys on the streets in Portland, Oregon, and I would have thought that, people who are, federal officers, in this case, it appears that most of them are from Customs and Border, but still, that's DHS, that they also took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that they would say, wait a minute, police on the streets with no identification, no way of even knowing for sure that they're police, that's wrong. That's not right. And yet there they are. So I'm very concerned, Melvin.
Yes. Well, again, the oath clearly states, protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So
right.
In this case, I cannot see how anybody of conscience would sit on the sidelines and let it go down. I just can't see it, but maybe I'm naive, but we'll see.
Well, I hope you're right, Melvin. You're the optimist here, apparently, and I'm being, this recent thing here in Portland is making me more pessimistic, but we'll see. Melvin, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Well, you a couple of weeks ago, you and I spoke, maybe even close to a month. You had asked a question about Donald Trump's rolling out of this very tried and true strategy of racism, particularly blackism, as I call it. The fear of Willie Horton, Sister Soldier. That doesn't matter, the denomination or the party. It's always been effective. And you had asked the question, would this be effective? And I said to you, when hasn't it been? And yesterday you had a phone call by a guy named Joe that was a very prescient and incredible phone call. And you picked up on that this thing he's doing in Portland is probably a test. Now, you spoke about Atlanta. This governor in Georgia today used the very terms you talked about yesterday, state of emergency in Atlanta, in an interview I heard him do on Fox. And so that is going down. Donald Trump is rolling this out because there are two drugs of choice in the United States, Tom. One is racism, particularly blackism, and by extension, war, because all the wars are always fought against people that are black and brown and yellow. Everyone's looking at the shiny object right now, which is Portland and Atlanta. Then he's supposedly going to roll this out in Detroit, mostly black cities. That's going down. That's already in process. But what I do want you and your callers to be aware of, what will guarantee Trump's reelection is if those two drugs of choice, the racism thing he's already started. The other thing will be an international event. And we've got hot spots all over the country. The bromance with North Korea is tenuous at best. We've got problems in the China Sea. We've got problems with Venezuela. There are problems with Iran. And there is going to be in the next few months, guarantee you, he's going to roll out something where people can rally around the flag because we're going to kill some enemy, whether it's manufactured or organic. I'm telling you, Tom, it's going down, and I'm never wrong on these things.
I agree with you, Kenyatta, and we know that he thinks this way because in 2010, when 2010 was the year that Obama was up for re-election. In 2010, when Obama was running for re-election, or was it 2012? 2012.
2012.
Thank you. Trump was tweeting that in October of 2012, any day now, President Obama is going to declare war on Iran because he needs a war to get himself reelected. Republicans have been thinking this way since Reagan with Grenada, Herbert Walker Bush with Iraq, and that whole thing. And so it's like, a Republican not having a war when he's in office is something that, to the best of my knowledge, has not happened since Eisenhower.
Tom,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Let me just say this to you. And you'll notice if you go back all the way to Vietnam, if you'll go back, every time there has been domestic turmoil, there has always been an international event to go with it. Every time.
Yep. Yeah, you could argue that LBJ escalated the war in Vietnam to deflect attention from his domestic problems. Although, frankly, the war itself became the problem that he had, larger than anything else. But yeah, I'm totally with you. Kenyatta, brilliant as always. Thank you. Charles in Hollywood. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I'm going to read a little what I wrote down. But is this what Trump meant by the red wave after the Democrats had a successful blue wave? The reason I think they brought up Obama and the sort of scandal that he may have interrupted a peaceful transition of power is because they're also projecting. Aren't we convinced at this point that my Governor DeSantis has completely monkeyed this up? I'm talking about his response to coronavirus. Also, I think part of Biden's speech is going to be, his inaugural speech is going to be, he was left with, what kind of mess was he left with after Trump? And if Trump is saying that all kids should go to school, then why aren't he just telling that also to the people that's homeschooling? And
and why doesn't he send his own kid to a public school?
Exactly. And for a man who was for stop and frisk, he won't even let lawmakers look at his taxes or his banking records. And I think all of this is a repudiation, of course, on libertarianism. You can look at the way that we don't have enough beds in an emergency like this. You can look at the response as far as private companies, I think, doing the work of what the federal government could be doing as far as, taking the tests, giving people their results in a reasonable amount of time, and also putting people out into, even though we have a downfall in the economy, they could have put so many young people to work or other people to work that want to trace, all of these cases. So, we got to deal with this, but the worst egregious thing is that if we don't hold people accountable, if we win, and we don't not only hold hearings, but we lock people up, that we take a look at this military leadership and get rid of all of them, then I think we deserve what we get, because it's getting worse. It's not getting better, and these conservatives have been emboldened.
I'm with you, Charles. Thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay with us. More of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Sharon in Salisbury, Maryland. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call. Tom, I've been listening to you for years, and I have never, ever heard a sense of pessimism in your voice. And I just want to encourage you, being that you're there in Portland and you're dealing with the unidentifiable federal agents or so-called federal agents that are coming in. I just want to tell you you hang on in there, because we come to you every day to listen to others' opinions from all over the world and to listen to your knowledge and your advice. And I just want to tell you to hang on in there. And I was listening to a previous caller, Karen, and Karen had an idea about lockdown when this unidentifiable group comes to a city. I thought that was a great idea. Matter of fact, before she had mentioned, I had the same thought. That's what prompted me to give you a call, because we have to do something. We cannot do nothing. We have to be prepared. Without people on the street, there cannot be an altercation with this group. So that is just one idea. Another idea, because I'm sure that there are many of our state, local, and federal Congress people, they listen to your program. I want to hear from them. I want each one of them to go into their districts, to go into their states, and to tell us what it is they're doing and what it is that we need to do to combat this evil force that is coming into our cities. Again, Tom, I'm praying for you. You hang in there, and you keep giving us that information that we so need to hear from you each and every day. You keep your chin up.
Thank you, Sharon.
Don't.
I'm doing my best.
Keep it.
Sharon, I have to say, I'm actually long term. Looking at this in a 10 or 20 year window, I'm actually very optimistic. Every 80 years, it seems like this country experiences a major crisis, and every 80 years, it seems like we dig down deep inside and find that well of egalitarianism, of idealism that came out of the Enlightenment in the 17th century, and broke on the shores of this country. Became the idea of democracy in America. And every 80 years, we make it better. Whether it was after the Civil War, after the Great Depression, and now we're 80 years out from that. But I think that it's going to be a hell of a rough ride between now and January 20th. And frankly, I think it's going to probably be a rough ride for a year or so after that. But I'm not despairing, Sharon, and I don't think that Trump is going to triumph, either at the polls or as fascist in chief. Does that help?
That really helps me a lot. And just know that I'll be listening to you each and every day.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Thank you. Thanks for your kind words, and thanks for reminding me of the importance of keeping up on this and sharing, generally speaking, a positive message with people, because it's what I feel. I am not despairing. I'm not freaked out. Well, I am freaked out. I'm very concerned, but I guess I've said enough. Sharon, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thanks for watching us there on Facebook Live. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. 9 years before the oligarchs of the South declared war against the North because they wanted to preserve slavery. In fact, they wanted to impose slavery in the North. Many of these guys that these monuments have been built to just came right out and said it. 9 years before that began, Frederick Douglass gave a speech saying, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" A good and important question. It continues to be a question because slavery is still legal in the United States. The 13th Amendment said that slavery can only exist under the color of law. If somebody is charged or convicted of a crime, then they can be held as a slave. And it's still going on in the United States. In fact, it's the main reason why we have more prisoners than any other country in the world, free labor. And then on top of that, we find that the police departments that get more 1033 equipment, they kill more people. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot going on in the world, and let's talk about it. Carol in Manassas, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Kenyatta, first of all, if you're listening, Kenyatta, please run for office. I would love to see him run for office. I always enjoy his calls. The reason I called is I am not despairing yet, but I'm becoming more pessimistic. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that I've been housebound since March 15th or not, but it probably plays a part.
Yeah.
But my concern is...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I
was just going to say, this time delay is maddening. Carol, go ahead. I will rant after you're done.
Okay. My concern is what's going on in Portland is going to happen everywhere. And as soon as the mayor asked them to leave, they said no. And I'm wondering now, the mayor of Chicago is trying to prevent them from coming, these stormtroopers, and they're saying, you can't stop us. And my question is, and why I'm becoming very frustrated and upset, is who would we go to stop Trump if he continues to say no to everything, because he doesn't care about the law, he doesn't care about people, he doesn't care about the coronavirus, he cares only about himself. And how do you deal with someone like that? I mean, is he just going to let these people overrun our cities? I live about 20 minutes from Pittsburgh, and we haven't had any problems in Pittsburgh. But I guarantee you, if he sends people there, we will. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Being locked down since, in the case for Louisiana, I think it was since March 10th, is a little maddening. In fact, we were discussing that this morning when we were getting out of bed. It's like it's so easy to just, for the pressure to just build up to the point where it comes out in ways that may surprise you, little antagonisms and things, and you just have to catch that all the time. But that said, with regard to Donald Trump and the troops and whether they'll back off, it turns out there's some really good reporting today that it was the Portland Police Union that reached out to the Trump administration and said, we would be glad to work with you. The police union in Chicago has reached out to the Trump administration. The police union, I believe it's in Philadelphia, reached out to the Trump administration. You can find these reports, I believe, at dailycoast.com. I'm pretty sure that's where I read this morning. And that's very troubling. And the one thing that I keep wondering is, when do we hit the point where conservatives who have been worried about overweening government, government having too much power, too much influence, particularly the police powers of government being too aggressive, those conservatives, I started the program talking about going to a John Birch Society meeting in like 1959 or something, or 60 or 61. And when do those people start flipping? When do they start waking up? So far, we're seeing some of them, the Steve Schmitz of the world, the Lincoln Projects, the George Conways, and now Liz Cheney speaking out against Trump. And I think that there's going to be a lot more coming, but will it be enough, number one? And number two, you've got all these well-armed militias all over the country that are almost exclusively, if not entirely exclusively, white guys who think that they're defending basically the power of white people. And at what point do they realize that Trump is just using them, that they're just useful idiots, for his power grab? Because he will use them and dispose of them, just like he has a whole series of secretaries of defense and cabinet officers. I mean, Trump doesn't give a damn about anybody. No fascist does. So I'm watching that carefully, Carol, but I don't know how this is going to shake out. Carol, I have to move along. Thank you very much for I'm sorry, Carol, the delay. I didn't hear. I heard you, but I had already pushed the button. Jimmy in Clovis, New Mexico. Hey, Jimmy, what's on your mind?
Yes, brother.
Jimmy, we got 30 seconds.
I just wanted to remind you that I think it started in the 80s that to advance in the military, you had to be a white Christian Republican. I was in at the time.
Well, it was certainly Christianity. I mean, this is the whole thing. This is why Mikey Weinstein sued the Air Force Academy, was because they were openly promoting Christianity. But I always thought that the military was, more diverse and more integrated than the rest of American society.
Not the power structure of it.
Oh, the power structure. Oh, interesting. Okay, Jimmy, I'm sorry, not having been in the military, I can't speak to that, but that's concerning. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. Same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy doesn't just fall out of the sky. It's not an accident, it's not a mistake, and it's not a force of nature. Well, actually, I could build a case that it is, but it doesn't always prevail, as you can look around the world and see. So we've got to fight for democracy in this country. We've got to hold democracy dear. We've got to hold our Constitution close. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good afternoon and be good to yourself and the people around you. Hug somebody today if you can, safely. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.